sex and power, sex and power.
Welcome to the Sex and Power podcast, real talk at the intersections of sex, power, oppression, and liberation. I'm your host, JANICEselbie. My guest today is Detra Denise, former pastor's wife who dared to change her life in unimaginable ways. After leaving her toxic marriage, Detra moved to New York City to start over. Thanks to both her love of connecting with people and her musical and storytelling skills, Detra built an exciting and meaningful new life for herself and ended up getting featured in Brandon Stanton's Humans of New York along the way. From writing and performing her own one-woman musical show to creating her own premium cigar line, Detra's story of resilience is powerful and very moving. Welcome, Detra. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Janice.
I'm in British Columbia, Canada, and you are joining me from New York. You're still in New York City, is that true?
I'm not in New York City. I have moved about an hour north of Harlem, where I lived for 6.5 years. So with Brandon, who wrote this story, did a fundraiser for me. So I paid cash for my house here. And I live out, rural woods all behind me, rock wall. I love it out here.
Oh, it sounds picturesque. And your story is just incredible. And I mean, bless Brandon for being such a wonderful human. What a great thing to do for someone else. Please tell us about your story. How did it all begin? I know religion played a big role in your life, in your growing up, and the husband that you were with. So start us off at the beginning, if you would.
Thank you. I was born into organized religion. My dad was a pastor of little churches in Arkansas. And so he and my mom, very poor couple, had 4 children. I'm the oldest of 4. So I grew up in church. And being the oldest pastor's daughter, I did many things when I was 14. Well, actually, when I was 4, my dad stood me in a chair behind the pulpit and told me to sing. And so that's how I grew up. When I was 14, he goes, "You will be teaching this Sunday school class." It was the 3 to 7-year-olds. At 14, he goes, "You're going to be running a bus route." And he assigned a driver for me. And so on Saturdays, I would go round up, kids, and I would have candy. So it was one of those things that I just did. And my dad kind of used me as a secretary. "Detra, here's the visitors, type the visitors letters." And I made phone calls, "Get so-and-so on the phone." He'd snap his fingers, "Get so-and-so on the phone." I knew every church member's phone number by heart. So that was my life until I went to college. And I went to the little, Baptist approved tiny college. And I got a full scholarship, and I traveled in this ensemble, and we sang for the churches to raise money for the school. So that was the beginning of my life. And then I went to college at this little religious school and met the guy I married, who all 4 of our parents had gone to this same school together, and his dad was a pastor. So I was born into it, married, to keep it going, and then taught it to my 7 children.
Wow, 7. Okay. Just let me catch my breath. 7 kids. That's a lot. Hey, and then what happened? What was that like? I mean, you were raised in a specific way, as we all are. What we know is what we see, what we experience when we're growing up, and then we set out on our own. And sometimes we are in the habit of repeating whatever patterns, communication patterns, behavior patterns that we witnessed in our family of origin, for good or for ill. What was it like for you?
I happen to love being a pastor's daughter. I loved being a pastor's wife. My dad was the type of pastor that he could come home in the afternoon with no shirt on, just his undershirt on, because he met a man without a shirt. He came home without shoes one day. I said, Daddy, where are your shoes? He said, I met a man who didn't have shoes and I gave him my pair of shoes. We were very poor, but my dad gave, and he gave generously and willingly. He loved people, but kind of the bad side of that is he has to be the center of attention, and the pastorate hides deep neurosis, especially men who tend to be narcissistic. That's what they call it now instead of other names. And, but anyway, I observed his treatment of my mom. I do think they had love for each other, but it was dysfunctional and he treated her badly. And I decided when I went to college, I wasn't getting married. I wasn't going to do that. And so I was going to prove you could go to college because everybody goes, oh, you're going to go get your MRS degree. This is what everybody in the church told me. You're going to go get your MRS degree. And I was quite offended. I was like, I'm going to prove you can go 4 years without getting your MRS degree. Well, I did accomplish 3, but not 4. But that was kind of the way of things. And I was born into a mindset. Now, I will tell you, my dad was very conservative, much more conservative than the dad of the man I married or the dad of a lot of other pastors. And so very strict. If I was listening to the Nat King Cole record my mother had, it was kind of the only secular music we had in the house. And my big toe moved to Nat King Cole singing Route 66. He would snap his fingers and tell me, I better not see you move to music. And yet, really, I didn't think anything of these things. It was what I was born into. And then my mom and dad attended a seminar when I was 10 years old. This man has been sued, now. I'm not going to call his name. I don't want to broadcast his name. But it was a chart with the umbrella and then the husband and then the wife and the kids. And I was taught from birth, if I don't obey my dad or the man I married, if there's something I want to do that if I don't get permission or their blessing and I do it anyway, then I'm out from under that umbrella. And they would tell me, God will love you, but he will not bless or protect you. And I'm a firstborn. Firstborns either rebel against authority or they want to please authority. And I chose, I want to please authority. One, I wanted to take care of my mom, I could not stand the way she was treated. And so I wanted to make things good between them. And I assigned myself, my parents did not do this, okay? I assigned myself the task of if I can keep them happy, they'll stay together. Because when I was 10, I began to hear, if I had the money, I'd leave you. If I had the money, I'd give it to you. And I heard that quite a bit when I was 10 years old, and I'm the oldest of 4. So that kind of became, my self-appointed job. I want to reiterate that my parents did not give me that job. And then when I went to college and I traveled in this ensemble, there's no free time. I carried 18 hours and we did 78 concerts that first year. So, and then I worked in the student center because I was poor and I had to have extra money just to be able to live. So, you're in this boat that is only on one stream.
Yeah, you're used to hard work.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. That's the truth. It's so interesting to hear from you that your dad was very generous and people focused, loved people. But then there was this other part of him that could be profoundly unkind to your mother. Some might even say abusive at times, verbally. So that's a lot for a child to recognize about their parents. And still, we are commanded to honor. I got married quotes going honor and obey our parents. Not all parents actually, I think, are worthy of that. But you cared very much about your mother as well, and you wanted to protect her however you could. And so you were on the path of obedience and pleasing. And you were working hard at the college, and then you met this other young person, this young man who was there, and he was bound for the pastorate as well. That's what he was looking
No, he wasn't. He decided in his third year that that's the path he wanted to take. So he
for.
became
Okay.
youth director. And so it was during my third year of college. He had already graduated and was out. He had been asking me every year I was in school, to date him, and I tell him no. All the other guys, you tell them no, and they're gone, and this one just kept coming back. And finally, the third year, I was like, look, I don't know what to do with you. All the other guys, I tell them no, and they leave it, and you just keep coming back. And what I told him, this is so romantic. What I told him was, look, I'll go out with you just long enough for you to know this isn't meant to be. Because I literally didn't know what to do with him. Now, I had liked him, but he just, I don't know. There was something there, and I didn't understand it. Plus, I didn't want to get married,
Right.
And so my daddy would not allow me to single date. So this guy would, do dates on campus, different things. And I fell in love. I didn't fall kind of in love. I fell head over heels in love.
Mm-hmm. That, to me, that sounds like a familiar story. Even the idea of you were not going to be the one to get your MRS at the college. You were not going to get married, and the persistence. So in one way, it can feel flattering when someone comes back and comes back and comes back, and in another way, it can be a red flag. But of course, if we have our rose-colored glasses on, a red flag just looks like a normal flag. We don't see the color there. And so we can just kind of, like you say, fall head over heels in love with this person who is wooing us, who is actively wooing. I mean, I remind my clients that to charm is a verb. If someone is charming, step back and think twice about things. So you fell in love with this person and then got married.
I did. And within 3 weeks of getting married, I knew I wanted out.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Okay. 3 weeks. Did you share your concern? Was there anyone you could talk with about the things that then were making you go, oh, I just made a big mistake?
No. And one afternoon, I'm a ponderer. I read all the Nancy Drew books. I read all the mystery books, so I was going to figure it out. And I put my laundry on my hip. We had lived in a government subsidized apartment, and the laundry facility was in the center. So, I got my detergent, my clothes, and walking over there. And I was seriously, pondering this and asking questions, and I was like, I want to call my dad to come get me. But my dad had told me several times when I was a teenager, when you get married, you got to marry somebody who can conquer you because you're too strong. And so I believed everything my dad said. And I was like,
Wow.
maybe dad's right. I'm just prideful. The first sin God lists us, he hates is pride. And then I married, and my mom meant well. She said, marriage is forever. And just so you know that if there's any problems between the two of you, we'll take him, but we won't take you. And so I knew there was no use to call. And I ascertained with my great, philosophical, logical, spiritual thoughts that I was to be submissive and yield my pride and become the wife that he needed. Because let's face it, every man is different, every man is different. So it was different than what I knew. And I can look back and go, bing, 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 bing. But then he was not verbally abusive. He was not physical abusive. He was psychological. He was emotionally abusive, But I wasn't taught about that at all.
And so does that mean there would be twisting of things going on to make you doubt yourself, or what's that like, rather than the verbal abuse? So he's not coming straight out telling you, saying nasty things about you, but it's showing up in other ways that make you uncomfortable.
It showed up the first time I noticed it. We got back from our honeymoon, I think on Sunday night. He went to work on Monday. And I was alone in the apartment. We had his car. He took it to work. He'd come home for lunch. And, here I sat in this apartment that he had been living in and furnished with, our wedding gifts. But so many of them we got at the wedding, we hadn't unpacked them. I had one personal box of my things from my former life and then my clothes. Most everything I had was new, but this one little box of things. And it was in a closet. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to unpack some of our wedding gifts. And we had a few decorative items. And I thought, I will just decorate the living room. He had this shelf unit kind of up in a corner. I don't even really know what it was. It could have been on top of a credenza, stand on a credenza, and then it would have a shelf. It was like that. It was long. And so I decided to make that a coffee table. We didn't have one. So I put it out in front of the couch, and we had some candles. And he had in his old life, I guess it was an anemone. It was a sea creature of some kind, and it was on this wooden tripod. And so he had it someplace, and I moved it and put it on this new coffee table along with a candle with a candle ring. I don't know. I just moved a few things. Could not wait for him to get home. Here I'm his wife, and I've opened up some of our presents, and I've made the living room now looks a little bit more inviting. And so I'm standing waiting for him to open the door and to take in. He's an artist, so he notices things. And he comes in, he opens the door, and he freezes. And I'm quite puzzled by the vibes or the energy, whatever you want to call it, is coming from him. It's nothing of surprise and joy. It is his eyebrows are drawn together, and he said, "You touched my things." And I said, "What?" He goes, "You touched my things." I said, "But I live here too now. I just opened up some of our wedding gifts." And, he said, "You moved my things." I said, "I'll move them back." So I picked up his sea anemone. I moved it back to where it was. I was heartbroken that he saw me as the enemy and that I was a possession to put on a shelf I was not allowed to be. And so that was the first thing that I noticed.
Heartbreaking.
It was. But I just thought, you know what? He's been living here, and I am new. And so I would have dinner, cooking when he got home, and he would give me a week household allowance every week, and he would tell me everything this had to cover, far more than it could pay for. But I'm creative. My mother was a very frugal shopper. But he also gives me a list. So not only do I have to buy the groceries for the week, he gives me a list of snacks that he has to have. On Monday, he has to have this snack. On Tuesday, he has to have this snack. On Wednesday, this snack.
Wow.
On Thursday, we repeat Monday snack. And on Friday, we repeat Tuesday snack. And they were expensive items. So I would have these ready, and he would tell me, have it ready. When I get home from work, I'm going to sit on the couch and eat my snack. So gladly, fix this for him, take it to him. I'm in kitchen cooking. And he said, "Where's your snack?" I said, I'm not hungry. I grew up, you don't snack. You didn't go in the kitchen. We had the 3 meals. Occasionally, mother made a snack. He grew up, they got to free-for-all scrounge to the kitchen. And I was like, I'm not hungry. I'm cooking dinner. And he said, "You're my wife. I've been snacking alone. You will go get a snack and sit beside me and eat it." So I would, and I didn't want to. I didn't want the snacks.
So
I didn't.
controlling.
Yeah, I could have just sat beside him, and I would some. That I didn't do. And then, what happens? You start gaining weight. Mm-hmm. So I joined Weight Watchers, and this was over a course of months. We've moved after a year to another apartment, 2 bedrooms in this complex, and I've joined Weight Watchers, and I am slimming down, and I'm quite delighted with this fact. But you want to please your husband. You cook him the best. He likes certain things. And so I'm losing weight. I'm happy. He comes in one night from visitation, and he is driven in the car, come up the steps to the second level with an ice cream cone, a double dip ice cream cone. Why not put it in a cup? Why? And you're driving in a car, But no, it's in the cone. It's my favorite from Baskin Robbins. I can't remember the name of it right now. Rocky Road double dip on the cone was my favorite. And it comes in the apartment. And when the door opened and he had that, I felt this. And I was like, what is that? And he said, oh, this is your reward. I said, I don't want a reward. I'm losing weight. No, I am your husband and I am rewarding you. And I said, but I don't want the reward. I'm losing weight. He said, I am your husband and you will eat this. And if you do not eat it, it will be because you don't love me.
Oh, brother.
Now, I wished I had had the whatever to just take it and shove it in his face, you know? I wish I had.
Yeah.
I'm not in the, but that was how he constantly treated me. And, you know, when I'm married, we went to church, everyone has had this youth director, you know, they want to know his new wife. So every Sunday, new people are coming up. Hi, my name is so-and-so. You know, it's so nice to meet you. We're so glad you're here. We love him. And then when we would get home, I saw so-and-so talking to you. They like you better than they like me, don't they? I was like, no, they don't. They just want to meet your wife. They love you and they want to meet your wife. Every Sunday. Every Sunday.
Wow.
And I would say, why don't we have, there was a couple in the church. I said, why don't we have them over? Are you kidding me? I am with people all day long. I don't want to see anybody else. It took me a decade to realize he was there with the pastor and his wife, the church secretary. They were in different offices. He was with nobody all day. He just didn't want me to be with anybody.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And so, oh, that's just so sad and scary too. And then children started coming along for you. Did he treat the kids the same way that he treated you?
I remember my firstborn, and you know how babies, I nursed my babies, and babies get hungry and want their mama. Now, I'll tell you, he was a hands-on dad. He changed diapers. He played with the kids. He bathed kids. You know, he was very hands-on. But when these babies wanted mama, he would get so mad at me. Mm-hmm. And every new baby I dreaded, you know, and after like the third baby, it got better because he had another child to play with to give him attention. But the first two, you know, I remember being so scared of this baby, you know, wanting me and not reaching for daddy and him being so mad at me. So, you know, after that, he could, as long as he could be the center of attention, you know, he was good. He didn't like adult children. There were times that he would treat them. And for some reason, I couldn't stand up for myself, but we'd go back in the bedroom and I'd put my hands on my hips and I'd say, look, you may treat me like this. You will not treat and I would call them my children this way. Do you hear me? So you need to rethink what you're doing. And I stood between him and the kids, honestly thinking the kids knew that, you know, but they didn't need to know that, you know, but I stood between. There were a couple of things that happened, and I can remember telling my oldest daughter he made her really mad, and she should have been mad, and I was mad. But I went to her and I said, listen, he's the head of this home. And the only way you're going to be okay is to submit to what he wants, just cheerfully, and understand he's the head of this home. And then when you're out on your own, do what you want, you know? And, but it's true, it's the only way you could live with him and be okay. And through the years, I would get to where I think, I got to get away. But I had 7 babies. I didn't have a job. You know, I couldn't go anywhere.
Oh boy, that feels so suffocating and so desperate. And so then at what point were you able to come to the conclusion and have the wherewithal to actually leave? Did you wait until there were no children at home? What was the situation for you when you finally were able to break free?
I realized, I think it was October 27th of 2013, that something was wrong. And I had a very wonderful thing happen for me that day, is how I know the date. I don't know if you've ever heard of BACA, Bikers Against Child Abuse.
Oh, yes, I have heard of it. Yeah.
Okay. When I was 2 years old, a group of men got me from behind my mama's back and began their heinous activities. And they told me if I ever told, they'd kill my mom.
Oh,
So that's why I became my mother's protector, you know? I don't know how a 2-year-old decides, I'm going to take care of my mom, but I did. So when I was 42, I began these flashbacks, if you will. And I spent several years, dealing with that, processing it. And I'm like a hound dog on the scent of a trail, I want to be free. I don't want to be held captive to anything. And so I had this idea after reading some stories about BACA. I was like, where were these guys, when I needed them? And here's the deal. They would have been there if I would have told them, I'm sure, but I didn't know. So I'm not trying to blame BACA. But it was that feeling of here are men who protect, because I had all these men in my life that didn't, that should have. And some pastors, it was very unfortunate to have these males in my life, a grandpa on my daddy's side, uncles and different people, pastors and my parents knew nothing about this. Okay. My parents knew nothing about this. And so it was just a hard thing. And I was telling a coworker, I worked at Dress Farm for a while in Fort Smith I'd heard about them and I said, man, I wish they would take me on a ride. I want to go to every place I was abused by these men. I had faced everything except that. And I thought if I could go back to these places with BACA, of all people, what a victory journey. And she went home and told her husband, and her husband says, you know who works for me? The head of BACA for Arkansas. And she came back to me and she said, I was just mentioning to my husband our lunch. And I said, are you kidding me? She said, my husband wants to know, can he give that guy your info? The guy called me and he said, I hear you want a ride. And so we met. Here's this 6'7", hair like a lion, tats, skull rings, rides up on his bike. And he says, tell me about what you want. And, the rule is 5 to 18 years. And I was 52 at the time. And he said, well, we usually do to 18. I said, I'm just a hair over 18. And he smiled and he said, just a hair. And their rule is they have to turn it into the cops, the police. And mine was, I had 3 years to turn mine in. And the man I was married to would not let me turn them in. He was very much against it. So the 3 years passed. So anyway, I said, yeah, I want this. He said, you know what, we'll do it for you. So we had a chapter in Central Arkansas. And on that day, and what I did is I left something of significance at each place. And at each place, I very carefully stated what happened there. And I told the people that were with me, there were like 7 motorcycles, a couple of wives, 2 of my sons went. The guy I was married to, they followed behind me in a truck. I was surrounded by motorcycles the whole ride. It was incredible. Wow. I loved it. And I said, I'm going to say these things as tastefully as I can. Some things are just what they are, but I'm going to do this as nicely as I can, as heinous as it is. Mm-hmm. So I left something of significance at each place, told the lies I had believed because of what had happened at each place. Mm-hmm. And the truth I was going to walk in when I left, So during this ride, and I got his permission 5 times. And I said, listen, I don't have to do this. And he goes, well, it would be very good for you. I said, it would, but I'm not going to risk your emotional well-being for mine. And I wouldn't have. And so 5 different times he gave me his permission. He gave me his blessing. And then the day of the ride, his behavior towards me was so bad that both my sons that were with me were like, what was his problem? If he couldn't have handled it, he should have stayed home. And I called him out that night when I got home. I called him out and I said, good old Detra's not coming through for you anymore. I just spent 10 years of my life reliving horrible things while living under what you're doing to me. And I can now see it and I'm done. And so I talked with the lady. Her question was, if he was beating you, would you leave him? And I said, yeah. She said, you'd be far better off if he beat the crap out of you every day. And the thing was, physical violence is horrendous, but I believe I'd have been better off if he'd have beat the crap out of me, because I would have known. I would have had my bones in cast. I would have had the bruises and the black eyes,
Yeah.
But I didn't know until she said that, because I was raised within a place that this is how men treat women. Not that all men treat women that way, but they can get by with it if they want to. And because I am a pleaser of authority, and I desperately wanted God's blessing in my life, I went along with it.
Wow. So, Detra, that's just so powerful. That Bikers Against Child Abuse supported you in this incredible, you taking back power that you were robbed of from such a young age. And a couple of your sons came along when you were on the Baca journey there. Were all of your children grown at that point, or did you still have some that were living at home?
I had 4 living at home. When I left, there were 4 living at home. The baby was 17. She still had a year at high school, but the rest were out, had jobs, in college. They were grown. There was just the one. She finished they got their own. They left the same night I did, and they got their own apartment, and she finished high school with her siblings. And then she had a married brother in town, and he watched over them. So
you all left? Everybody was gone. The night that you left, all the rest of the kids that were there, you all left. So did they know? They must have known what was going on. Was it a plan that you had to carefully put together, or what happened? Okay.
No, and the last year and a half, I came home from that lady I had talked to, and I sat down with him and I said, listen, I've been a bad wife. I thought I had been loving and godly and forgiving, and I have figured out I've enabled. And if there's one thing I'm not going to do, it's enable. And so I'm telling you, from here on out, this is on you. I've begged you for over 30 years to get help. I've gotten help myself. I had been seeking help for the 10 years I'd been reliving all this stuff. And I said, I'm not asking you to do anything I haven't done. And I said, I'm just as frustrated with me as I am with you, because I've enabled and I've made you think this is okay. Even though I've begged and I've pleaded, and from time to time, I would just put my hands on my hips and tell him what for. And he said, Detra, no, you've done this right. And I said, I've tried. He said, no, mostly you've done it right. I said, well, there's been a couple of times I've yelled at you. And he goes, no, you've done it right. And, one night, and so for a year and a half, it got hellish because good old Detra didn't help. And Detra just cried. I just cried. And my kids saw that, and they knew that something was wrong. In fact, one of my kids came to me, I'm not going to call them by name, and told me twice, fix this. You are ruining our lives. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm through. I've tried for 30-something years to fix this, and I can't. And it's his time. But because, what are they going to think? I had always fixed it. I had always covered. I had always stood between them and him. So when I quit calling him to account, and they can feel it and see it, and my youngest son did write me a letter, and he said, it hurts me, to hear you say that you would divorce him if you could, and you wish you weren't alive. And I apologized to him. I said, I'm sorry for both of those things. I'm sorry. But I was to the point where death was, to me, the only option. There was nothing left. Wow. Death would keep my kids from knowing. Death would keep me having to tell my parents. Death would keep all these churches we had ministered to for all these years from hurting the name of Christ, hurting the name of God. I don't know why I thought God needed help protecting his name.
Right.
When used it that manner. And death would protect me because I was told by like 3 people who weren't divorced, who were counselors, you got to get away from him. How do you do that? I didn't know how to do it. So death was the only thing that I thought would solve everything. And then I promise you, no one else is going to figure out what that man's up to. He's good at what he does.
Wow. So you were done just kind of bending over and trying to make everything look okay. And you were letting the children then were seeing him for who he was, because you weren't trying to hide it. There's that beautiful saying by Maya Angelou, when someone shows you their true colors, don't paint over them. And it sounds like that was the point where you dropped the paintbrush. You weren't trying to paint over his true colors anymore.
They still couldn't see it because he walks in the door every day like your life's wonderful. And he'll go, oh, are you okay? And I would say, well, you lied to me about this. He goes, 2 days ago, get over it. So they never saw him for what he was. He's good. But they just saw that I was no longer trying and my despair. So no, the night I escaped on the side of the interstate, his son put me in a hotel, and these 4 children and the married son came to my hotel room to talk to me. I told them what had happened. And one of my children was like, so what are you going to do tomorrow? I said, I don't know. I guess go home. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. I was up most of the night asking for direction. And the next morning, a guy in the church wrote, he said, Detra, your paycheck's ready. Out of 34 years of marriage, even my whole life, 54 years, nobody in a church had ever said, please come work in my office for 2 weeks. And I'd gone and worked in his insurance office for 2 weeks. And he texted me that morning and said, your check is ready. And then my oldest son, who lived in New York, had heard about it. He called me. He was working in Oklahoma for 3.5 weeks. He said, I heard what happened. Garrison's going to pick you up. Garrison got the hotel room for me. He's going to take you to lunch. There's nobody at home. You get in your truck and you come to Oklahoma. You're done. And so I threw all my clothes, junk jewelry, Bible journal in my Suburban. I had money to put gas in it because I had this 2-week paycheck. And I went to Oklahoma. And so to my children, I lied to them, because I said I was going home the next day. So I lied. To me, I didn't lie. I didn't know. I didn't know.
No, exactly.
But so that night, one of my other sons drove by the hotel and said, he's going to take you to lunch. I had a talk with Dad last night. I've told him this isn't on you, it's on him. And in fact, what he said is I told Dad to get his shit together. And we never cussed. Never cussed.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. And he said, I told Dad, this isn't on you, it's on him, and get his shit together. And he said, I took all the kids home with me. So he took the kids home with him. They moved out of the house, and they were out for over a year.
Oh, wow. And was this, so this was one of your sons who had maybe perhaps a little more insight into the accuracy of what their dad was like. And this son was old enough that he could actually give you a hand in this way, get you moved out and help the other kids.
Well, this son took those kids, and his wife decided that I had abandoned my kids and told my kids, your mother has abandoned you. And so my kids no longer talk to me. I have 5 children who have decided that they don't want me in their life because I'm too sinful, And I raised them in that. That's on me. That's not on the man I married. I did that. And so I own it. I don't know what to say about that, except I trained them in that way. That's how I was trained. That's how I trained them. And I love them. I miss them with my whole being.
Yeah, of course.
I have 12 grandkids. I don't get to see. And my prayer is they grow up and want to find the crazy grandma. I do hope that one day my 5 children may decide that, they could at least be civil towards me. Um,
Mhm.
but it's a world, it's a closed world, a closed circuit world. And I don't know how familiar, well, I don't know about your religion you grew up in, but in the Old Testament, when they do the yearly sacrifice and they put the sin on the head of the goat and send it out to the wilderness.
Mhm.
So my kids asked to meet me in a parking lot about a year after I left. I went back and got my things out of the house. It was my things. I didn't take anything for the
Really?
running of the household. And the next day they went to meet me in a parking lot. And, it was like a shootout at the Old West at noon,
Yeah.
I stood up, they come in a semicircle, arms across their chest, and they come one at a time and kiss me on the cheek, go back and get in place. And one of the children stepped forward and gave a speech that had been prepared for him. And the only sentence I remember was, until you're willing to come to us and admit you're a liar, a deceiver, a manipulator, narcissistic, and mentally ill, we don't want to be around you. You're not welcome in our apartment. And I love them enough to be the goat that carries away the sin,
Oh, Detra, that is just, as a mother, that is so hard to even to
It is
hear that
hard.
pain. Yeah.
But that's how they see it. And people can't act differently than what they believe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. So you have two children that you are still in contact with. And so then bring us forward a little bit. What happened after that? So you're out. You went to New York to live with this son who said, "I'll give you a hand while you're getting on your feet." What did you do? Oh my gosh, talk about starting over, like rebuilding from the ground up. Wow.
Yeah, he was in Oklahoma for those 3 weeks, and then he was like, "I'm just taking you to New York," because every day was a new playbook. None of us knew what we were doing, and so he drove me to New York. And I know he brought me to New York to start a new life, and I tell everybody I came to New York to die, and I did. Life was over. Life was over. There was nothing left for me. I had failed at everything I had given my all for. And so I just was waiting again on death, but it was going to be in New York City. I had never been to New York, had no desire to come to New York. I would have liked to have come to see my oldest son and his wife, but there was no money to travel. So I was with him and her for a year. And then they transferred with a job. And, I was like, I'm going to stay in New York. By this time I had gotten my things. My kids didn't want to be around me. And those 5 are in Arkansas. My oldest son and my 4th son are the 2 that, cheer me on and I talk to. So they left, and with the help of a couple of friends, I made it a couple of months while trying to figure out what I was going to do, how, if I could rent a room. And I couldn't. So I ended up in a homeless shelter. There were 30 of us women in one room. It was private shelter. Lucky for me, it was a private shelter, not the city shelter. And the day I went in there was 9 years ago, October 31st. I wasn't for sure, but what it was the end of me, I just didn't know what was going to happen to me. But I had this faith, if you will, this hope that it wasn't the end. And I didn't know. But in my journey, like when I got out of my Suburban and started walking down the interstate, I was just like, God, I need help. And I felt like he brought me to that point of escape. Get away. You have to get away. And a lady stopped and she said, "Ma'am, do you want a ride?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "God said to stop and pick you up." And from that moment, it has been like those steps in front of me. And what I've learned is not only does he love me, he blesses me and protects me like no one has ever done. No one has ever done. And so the homeless shelter for me was this 4 months. If I had known it was only going to be 4 months, I would have thought I can do anything for 4 months. But when you take your little suitcase across the entrance, it's infinity. And infinity is a very long time. And I didn't know till 4 days before I got out that I was going to get out. But I made friends in the homeless shelter. I like making friends wherever. I made friends in the homeless shelter and learned a lot of things. And two important things I learned is one, there's not an address that can define who I am or what I am. And when I had that thought for the first time, it kind of surprised me. The next thought was, then why are you letting the men from your childhood, your children, and the man you married and your parents define you? And if I wasn't living the reality of homelessness, which has a terrible stench, I don't think I ever would have been able to go, yeah, why am I? And I was able to let that go. Now, I'm telling you, it's like a cloak that you have to let go, and then the air's cold and you have to decide to keep walking. It's a journey, and I'm still on that journey. But I have been able to go, it really doesn't matter what anybody judges me as or says about me. That doesn't matter. They don't get to decide who I am and what I am. I get to decide that. And have I had
power?
Time? Yeah. Have heinous things been done to me? Absolutely. But that does not make me a victim or even a survivor. It means I can be an overcomer. And so that is one thing I learned. And the other thing was I would attend AA meetings just so I could go outside. And I felt bad, entering their very vulnerable time, but I needed oxygen. And I learned after several meetings that, I'm just as addicted as they are. My addiction is to being good. And being good and being so addicted to that is what ended me up in a homeless shelter in New York City.
That is such a monumental discovery to make, and we can be addicted to so many things, including to being too good, this people-pleasing mentality that can crush us and suffocate us and lead us to stay in terrible situations. So along this way, you are making choices to extricate yourself. You're climbing out from under the rubble that is suffocating you, including this understanding that there's somewhat of an addiction going on to that. Were you working at the time?
I was working one job. I was a Starbucks barista when I went to the homeless shelter. And then I started working at Paper Source as a holiday greeter. The manager of Paper Source would come into my Starbucks, and he decided he wanted to hire me to go stand for 4-hour shifts in the door of Paper Source and with a Southern voice say, "Welcome to Paper Source."
Oh,
that's what he decided he wanted his people for holiday to hear. It always amused me. And one day I was like, you do know I can do more than say, "Welcome to Paper Source." But so I was working 2 jobs while in the shelter most of that time.
wow.
And still couldn't even qualify for food stamps.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So what happened? At some point, 4 months later, you were able to get out. What happened?
One of my Starbucks customer asked me where I lived. I told them. They met with me, and after a lot of questions, he said, "We just know you as our barista and we love you. We cannot imagine what you're going through. So for the next 6 months, we're going to give you this many hundreds of dollars every month, and we don't ever want to be paid back. We just want to invest in you." And the drummer, I had done one show at the time, and the drummer of my band had bought an apartment in Harlem, and he said, he knew I was in a shelter. He goes, "Come out here and look about renting a room." So I trekked out to Harlem, and with what they gave me, I could rent a room. So I rented a room from him for 2.5 years. Then through another Starbucks customer, got a full-time job, and I moved 7 blocks up Broadway and had a rent-stabilized apartment for almost 4 years. And then 5 years after I was out, a volunteer in the shelter, she was no longer a volunteer there, but she wrote to me. Now, her and her sister helped me. Like, her sister was a lawyer, helped me figure out how to get divorced. They came to some of my music shows. I sang at her sister's wedding. They kept in touch with me. And she said, have you ever heard of Humans of New York? And I said, yeah, I've read some of the stories. They're beautiful. She said, I just got through talking to Brandon, the author and publisher. He may want to feature you. Are you up for it? And I was like, sure. I didn't know what it entailed. So he came, and interviewed me. And I knew I got to pick where my picture was made. And by this time, the Harlem Cigar Room guys have offered me protection. And so I started smoking cigars to accept protection. And I wanted to tell them thank you. So I asked the owner, hey, this guy is very famous and people will come find this place. I really want to say thank you for what y'all have done for me. Because who thought, because I prayed, crime's going up in 2020. God, can you protect me in Harlem? And I need you to let me know in a way my oldest son, who had moved away but brought me to New York, is comfortable. And these men, I was set at a table right beside them on the sidewalk when the sidewalk cafes opened. And they started chatting with me. And then one day, one of them says, we want to offer you protection. Very specific, And so I called my oldest son. I said, fly up here. They've offered me protection. He loves cigars. I said, I'm going to smoke cigars. And so I smoked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. And the men all told him, we got your mama. You don't worry about her. Nothing's going to happen to her. So he started paying my membership. So these men, one of them said, you've been given a golden ticket to a place women aren't invited. And I said, I know, and I'm grateful. And there were a couple of women who would be in there, but there just weren't women, much less white women, So Brandon, the owner, said, sure, you can have I wanted to be smoking a cigar and with the Harlem Cigar Room behind me, because he did these one-page stories. And when he interviewed me in about 15 minutes, he was like, I'm so proud of you. I'm going to do a whole series. So there's 15 chapters of me smoking cigars in Harlem. And then the world starts flying in to smoke cigars with me and to see my shows. So I had people from New Zealand, Hawaii, all over. And so I designed my own line. But I can't remember the question you asked me, why the cigars had to come.
I'm actually really curious. You keep talking about shows, and when you did your show, would you please tell us what that's about? This is another incredible part of your journey.
Well, I'd been in New York less than a year, and I would go listen to bands. Just to give my son and his wife some time alone, I would be out of the house. And so I would go listen to bands. And there was a Hill Country Barbecue in Brooklyn. It has since closed. There's one in Manhattan that I would go to on Sundays afternoon. And I wanted to give my son and his wife the whole day Sunday by themselves. So I would be out all day. Well, I would go eat lunch. This place had Texas barbecue and good tea. And then upstairs from 1 to 4, they had what they called Fam Jam, and it was a band called the Three Gentlemen. I went up there the first Sunday and asked the bartender, I said, can I sit at the bar? I don't drink, but I didn't want to be in the fray of the families. He said, sure. This band adopted me the very first Sunday I showed up. And eventually they assigned me a solo. And so hearing this music, and like I said, I've been singing since I was 4, and I've been a teacher and a communicator of how to get through life, in a way that's palatable. And anyway, I thought, I need to do a show. And the sound guy came to me one day. He said, I can hear you singing. Now, here I am in the very back, quietly singing harmony to these songs. They were old saloon songs, and I wasn't for sure I should be singing about alcohol. But I'm back there singing quietly harmony and stuff. He goes, I can hear you singing. We should give you your own show. And I said, oh, my goodness, I thought I was being quiet. And so I went to him a few months later and I said, listen, you said this. I don't know if it's really could happen, but you don't even know why I'm in New York. I want to do a show and called it One Woman's Journey to Love. And I want it to be an eclectic group of songs. There's songs you would never put together in a show. But in between, I'm going to tell the story of how I got to New York and about the victory. And so I got to do it. I picked out 5 guys from different bands I knew, and I put together this hour-and-a-half show. I invited friends. I had 40 people there, charged $10. And that was my first show in New York. And it was going to be one-off. I just needed to get this out of me in a fun way. I'd never stood on stage and sung love songs. It was always hymns, which I love hymns to this day, but I'd always wanted to sing love songs. And I opened my show with L is for the way you look at me, because Nat King Cole was the only record I got to listen to growing up. I love Nat King Cole. So I did this show, and it had the feedback was like, I want to put my money behind you. I want your information. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And somebody else was like, we need to do fundraisers. You need to be in front of, women's domestic violence. You need to be doing this. I said, oh yeah, I just don't want to do this. Yeah. And then 3 people came to me and was like, you healed me. You healed me, Detra. I said, no, the source of healing
Wow.
in me. And one lady, she was about 80. She was like, I came. She was a Starbucks customer. You invited me and I came because I like you. You're kind of quirky, but I didn't know if you could sing. She said, but you can sing. She said, but I'm never going to be the same in here, Detra. I'm never going to be the same.
Oh.
And she and I became very good friends. So I've now done over 20 shows in New York. I would love to take the show on the road. That takes money. I'm to a place where there's going to have to be somebody that goes, yes, this has got to go to another level. I wrote a 1-woman play, did 2 nights. It's a musical, 2 nights of that. I'm in the process of writing another one because so much has happened. But when Brandon came and did the story, and I'm in the cigars, people wrote to me and said, the story is quite incredible, but it was that cigar. It was that cigar that just put it over the top. And then he did a fundraiser, like I said, and I paid cash for my house and I moved up here. And I've had my Harlem guys come up here for a barbecue. I've told them, you're my friends. My license plate on my truck says Harlem Girl. They're my Harlem loves. And they're very special to me.
Incredible. I can't believe you're telling me this story, and it is a true story because this is just a movie playing in my head. You have had such incredible things happen, opportunities, and you have walked through each door that's opened and made the most of the opportunities. Your story is one of the most amazing stories of resilience that I have ever heard. And boy, you've got the heartache, but you also have the incredible love of chosen family and friends in this beautiful, diverse community that you're a part of, and that you've built for yourself. So then you're featured in Humans of New York, and people from all around the world start hearing your story and wanting to know more about it. What's your life like today? How long ago was the Humans of New York series?
It was 3.5 years ago. And I had 6 movie offers. So they're in the process of making a movie. We'll see.
Gosh.
We'll see if it actually gets made. But I worked with the writer of the movie script. I've met the producer. I've met the director. I worked with the writer for several months. We went to Arkansas for 6 days. He texted me a few days ago. The script is on its 4th draft. So, we'll see what happens. Do I really want a movie made about me? I don't think that I do. But my prayer is this, and I'm very much a praying woman. I have no use for church, organized religion in any way, shape, or form. But whatever's on that screen that represents me allows the world to know about a one true living God that offers love that you can't imagine and safety that you've never felt, and a joy that just makes you willing to give up every hard thing that's ever happened to you to walk in this and feel that hug that I have arrived. And I know, when I met with the producer and director came to one of my shows, and the night before he had won an Emmy for producing the #1 TV show in the world. I'm not going to tell you the name of it. I'm not to tell their names. And then the producer came back to my apartment with his assistant, and they brought the writer for me to meet, and he lives in New York. And the writer told me, hey, I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get this job. And my Hollywood agent had flown into New York. She said, it's kind of unusual. They're making the writers compete as to who gets to write your script. And I was like, really? So when he and I met together for the first time, I asked, why did you want to write my story? Because this is a gay guy living in New York, He's 60 or 61 now. And I was like, why did this man want to write my story? It just seems to be the antithesis, of everything he is. Now, I have lots of gay boyfriends in New York, but I didn't know why this one wanted to tell my story. So he said, I'm going to be honest, there's two reasons. One, I grew up in Texas as a gay kid. Now, I was in a very progressive religion, so I wasn't raised like you were, but I lived in it as a gay kid. He goes, I left my faith behind. He goes, you still believe in God. I find that intriguing. He said, the other thing is you moved from the red estate to the blue estate, and it looks like seamlessly. He goes, I don't know how you did that. I said, I didn't know I did that. And I said, I don't care anything. I think about politics as I do religion. I have no use for any of it. To me, it comes down to the heart in front of me. I see hearts as treasures that have been created, and these treasures, we've all been bashed and broken, and we've got cracks and we've been mended. And some treasures can no longer receive love. They just can't. You can try and they just can't receive love. And I've learned to move on. But every treasure has a story to tell, its journey along the way. And every treasure needs love, and every treasure has love to give. And you have to figure out maybe the form, and maybe a little bit different form than what you're used to. But after several weeks of interviews, the writer turned off the recorder and he said, your faith is palatable.
Wow.
He said, I want to tell the story of this Christianity that you have because it's the one we all wanted and we didn't get. So my prayer is that whatever appears on that screen is that. And they don't even notice the really quirky lady that, escaped on the side of the interstate and smoked cigars in Harlem. But that's what they see.
Wow. Your humility is so. It's beautiful. You just come across as a very sweet, very warm, very loving person. And in my books, you are also very, very powerful. And I hope that anybody who watches or listens to this interview that we're doing together recognizes, takes inspiration from you. You got to a point where you realized you were worth more, and you needed to take steps to get yourself out and to start building a new life. And I mean, thankfully for you, then you had a faith that you leaned into, and feeling like you had this powerful being all along the way, behind you, supporting you, encouraging you. And I know how powerful that can be as well. Is there anything else as we wind down that you'd like to share? Or, if anybody else is really struggling right now, maybe someone is in a homeless shelter right now and listening to or watching our conversation.
What I constantly say on my social media is this: never give up. And, sometimes people they want a savior, someone to come rescue them, whatever. And what I'm going to say is really there's nobody going to come rescue you, but here's what you're going to find if you can learn to look for it: breadcrumbs. Look for the breadcrumbs. I firmly believe that there are breadcrumbs scattered. And these are breadcrumbs. I used to buy 50-pound bags of wheat. I would grind my wheat, make my bread, no preservatives, healthy. Let me tell you, these are the breadcrumbs made from that. It's the best wheat. And you look for those crumbs and you sit down and you squat and you eat the crumb, take in that nourishment, that little bit that's there. But when you get it, you begin looking for the next breadcrumb, because most of the time you're going to be let out slowly, because I'm convinced if we were just put here, we wouldn't know what to do with it. It would scare the hell out of us and we would run, we would run. So never give up and look for breadcrumbs.
Oh, that's so beautiful. What a wonderful way to end this conversation. I'm so grateful to you for joining me today. And I'm really excited about the things that are in store for you, these stories that people are working on for a movie, potentially more music for you or more musical shows. How can people find you and connect with you, say, on social media?
Well, on Instagram, I am if you spell out the word one woman, NYC, and then the number one. And then on Facebook, I'm Detra Denise. That's how you can connect with me on social media. My website is www.detrastory.com. And Detra does not have an I or a D in it. It's just DETRA. So it's DETRA'S, story, another S.com. And there you'll find out the story that was printed on Humans of New York, several podcasts I've been in, a music video. I've got an original song. I have a YouTube channel, which is Detra Denise. So on my YouTube channel is the lady with the cigar telling stories. There are music videos. There's just different things that are available. And then you can always reach out to me on Instagram and Messenger for Facebook. I generally, I will check profiles and see if I want, because if you know, there's all these men, I probably get 40 to 50 messages a week privately, hello, beautiful.
No.
I delete. But yes, you can reach out to me. So make sure that it's something that is more than, the stars shine in your eyes. And I had my 4th marriage proposal this morning. Yeah.
Wow. Yes, I definitely can understand that. Thank you again for joining me and sharing your powerful story. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes so people can reach out to you. And a special thank you to my friend who recommended that I interview you. This has just been such a delight. I wish you were my neighbor. I wish that we lived closer and so that we could actually spend some time together, because I feel like I could learn a lot from you, and you're just a wonderful human. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on the Sex and Power podcast. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.
Sex, sex, power.